Hello, everyone here so far. My name is Kim, and I am a volunteer and member of the Calgary Horticultural Society. Welcome to our Seed to Table session on preserving your garden bounty. The Seed to Table series is offered in partnership with the City of Calgary. The focus is on eliminating waste and pollution and conserving resources. It is a shift from a throwaway mindset to one that extends the life cycle of goods, food, and resources through better design and continuous reuse, so nothing goes to waste. The Seed to Table series is a low input growing initiative that goes through each of the steps required in a gardening journey. The classes and resources in this series will help you to become increasingly self-sufficient, save money, and reduce waste. Before we get started, I would like to share the Society's land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the enduring and active relationship of Indigenous people with this land, specifically the area in which we inhabit today, also known as the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7. The Society, as an organization, is focused on the well-being of the land. We endeavor to honor Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis rights and relationship with the land, and the ability for all to grow, live, work, and play within this territory. Thank you. A few housekeeping notes. Before we begin, we are recording this session, so the recording will be available on the Seed to Table resource page on our website. We will take questions at the end, and if you have questions, please type them in the chat box. At the end of the session, there will be a link to a class evaluation. Please complete the survey. We use this information to improve our program content and develop new class material. A little bit about the Horticultural Society. We are a registered charitable nonprofit organization celebrating 117 years of cultivating Calgary's gardening community. Our mission is to encourage gardening for the enhancement of our environment and quality of life. And one way we do this is through sessions like this one. So I would like to now introduce our instructor, Elaine Rude. Elaine is a master gardener, a garden designer, instructor, and writer. She gardens on 4 acres northwest of Calgary, growing vegetables, fruit, numerous perennials, shrubs, and trees. Elaine is very aware of the challenges we face gardening in the Chinook zone, but paying attention to our site, choosing the right plants, and growing them in a sustainable way will ensure that we can have gorgeous gardens. There are so many opportunities to create prairie gardens. We just need to believe it's possible. Welcome, Elaine.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about preserving the harvest. And it's been an interesting year growing all of our stuff. Everything seems to have come ripe all in August and into September. So it's a busy time of year. So hopefully this will give you some tips to help you decide what to do with this bounty that Mother Nature has given us. So why preserve what you grow? Well, everyone's got their own individual reasons. Bumper crops, for example. I mean, this year we had a bumper crop of apples, a bumper crop of cherries, and now a bumper crop of crab apples. So, you can't just eat them all. So what are you going to do with them? It does allow you to eat healthier throughout the year because you pick it, you process it, and you're maintaining almost all of those nutrients. It does help with the budget because, if you're growing your own or you're buying fruit in season, it's a lot a lot easier to eat that way than to buy fresh throughout the winter months when we're bringing our food in from a long ways away. It's also a good way to make sure that you have hard to find ingredients because sometimes, you can't find it during the winter months. It's only available during the summer. It does decrease our carbon footprint, though I have to put a caveat in here because in most of these preserving methods, you actually do use some energy. So it does reduce it as into trucking it in from a long ways away, but the methods that you use do use power, electricity, or gas. And because you can process it right at the peak of its ripeness, they tend to have a better flavor. Now, there's three goals of preserving, and it doesn't matter which method you use. You want to prevent contamination from damaging agents. So, as soon as you pick something, it starts to degrade. And there's a lot of microbes that are normally present on our food, in our soil, in the air. And what you're trying to do is curtail those microbes from proliferating on your food or into continuing to break them down and basically making compost. And it also preserves the nutritional value because, as I said, the minute you pick something, it starts to degrade. And it starts to degrade through naturally occurring enzymes, which then break down the nutrients and eventually turning it all into compost. So that's kind of what you're wanting to do. We're going to cover these techniques tonight. There's a couple others that are available, like salting your food or dry curing, which we're not going to talk about. I have no experience with that, and I think, you have to be um, pretty experienced to try some of these things. But we'll talk about freezing, dehydrating, storing, fermenting, pickling, and various ways of canning. So let's start with freezing. And it really is the easiest of all. We all have freezers, even if it's just a small one at the base of our fridge or a chest freezer, but pretty much we all have a freezer of some kind. When you're processing food to freeze, a lot of times we have to chop it up. You can, but it's better to take smaller pieces than to leave something whole. So like an apple, for example, you wouldn't want to freeze a whole apple because by the time the whole thing is frozen through, you've lost a lot of the nutrition and the piece of fruit has started to degrade because it freezes harder from the outside and more slowly from the inside. So you want to chop them into small, evenly sized pieces so that everything kind of freezes at the same time. It also helps when you go to cook it because they cook at the same rate as well. As soon as you pick something, or maybe you've gone to the farmer's market and you've purchased something, you want to freeze it as quickly as possible to preserve that nutritional value. Because as I said, once you pick it, um, enzymes get to work and start to break it down. So it loses nutrition the longer it sits around. Throwing it in the fridge will slow it down, but it's still better to work with it very quickly if you can. And freezing is good for almost everything. I don't know if there's anything that can't really be frozen. Um, yeah, like I can't think of anything. Even potatoes can be frozen with a little bit of cooking in advance to kind of get them through. So really all there is to do is pick your fruit, purchase your fruit or your vegetables, wash them, pat them dry, chop them up into small pieces, like we said, and then spread them on a single layer on a cookie sheet. And the idea is that if you spread them on a cookie sheet, they're flat. And then when you go to put them in bags or containers, they come apart singly. If you were to throw it all into a container or a bag, what you'd get is a lump. Very difficult to separate things. So I find this is much, much simpler than just kind of throwing it all in a bag and taking your chisel out afterwards. If you're going to freeze vegetables, most vegetables require a mild pre-cooking step called blanching. And the idea is to decrease or eliminate any bacteria on the food surface. It helps preserve nutritional quality by deactivating enzymes. And it helps keep the food looking its normal color, so it's not purple beans, for example. If you were to freeze purple beans when you cook them, they turn green, but it's a nice vibrant green. So blanching will help with that as well. Now, there are a few exceptions to the rule. Excuse me. You don't have to blanch beans if you don't like. I don't like blanched beans because they're squeaky and they have an odd texture. And I find they freeze just fine with just freezing them flat and putting them in bags. The only downside to not blanching anything is that the freezer life might be a little shorter than if you were to blanch everything. But beans, corn, and peas, and tomatoes, even though tomatoes aren't a vegetable, they're a fruit, they can all be frozen without blanching. And I find with all of them, they actually have a much better texture. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do. But when you're blanching your vegetables, they all have a different time with which to blanch. You're not cooking them. Basically, you're just heating them. And in the handout, there is a chart there on how long to blanch things, but there's lots of information online as well. So, for example, peas, you blanch them for 1.5 minutes, whereas corn, if you were to blanch it, use 4 minutes. So it depends on the vegetable. Each one is slightly different. So basically, all you do is get a pot, get everything ready first. So you need cold, cold water. Uh, you can throw ice in it or whatever, but that will deactivate thing. You'll need a colander or a colander is the easiest, I guess, and a boiling pot of water. So you boil your water. You've got your vegetables cut up into small pieces. You throw them in. Pop once the water is boiling. Pop them into the pot. Put a lid on and set the timer for the prescribed amount of time. So broccoli is 2 minutes. And let it boil for 2 minutes. Pull it out. Drain the hot water, and then immediately put it into that cold, cold water. And what it does is it stops any further cooking process because you don't want to cook them. You just want to warm them up enough to deactivate those enzymes. Once they're cooled down, then you put them on a tea towel or something, pat them dry as easily as you can, spread them out on a cookie sheet, and immediately put them in the freezer. And I find the fridge freezer works better than a chest freezer to freeze them quickly. And then once they're frozen, then you can package them up into bags or containers, getting as much air out as possible. If you don't get the air out, you're going to get ice crystals. So because there's still moisture in these things. So a straw works really well. You just insert a straw into a bag and suck on it until the bag shrivels up like a vacuum. You can also get vacuum sealers that will do that for you, but that will help preserve it and keep it from getting frost burn or freezer burn as well. So these are some things that we've done. We do peas, beans, saskatoons, raspberries. We freeze a lot of stuff to the point where I have to start canning things because there just isn't any more room in the freezer. It's also very important to label and put a date on. So, every year I go through and pull out everything in the freezer, defrost it, and then put it back. And this is a really good time to pull out anything that's 2 years or older. Now, you'll read sources that say 1 year tops. If you're lucky, I find 2 years work really well. I like to double bag everything. And by double bagging, I find you don't get freezer burn quite as quickly. So that helps. And then keep an inventory of what you have because, when people are rooting around in a freezer, things get all mixed up. So we have either a piece of paper or I have a felt board, and we just keep track. When something goes in, we add it. When something goes out, we cross it off. So right now I've got 15 bags of Saskatoons. So if we pull one out, I'll have 14. And it just kind of gives you an idea of what's in there. And if you can't find it, you know it's there. Now, freezing herbs. Most of us think about herbs as just drying them, but there are a lot of herbs that really don't dry very well. And you'll find them in the grocery store in the dried section, but they don't have a lot of flavor. So things like parsley, dill, basil for sure, tarragon, mint, chives, lemon balm, lovage, and good luck finding lemon balm, lovage, or chives, um, in the spice aisle of a grocery store. They actually have much, much better flavor if you freeze them. And sometimes you need to freeze them in a medium such as oil or occasionally water. Other times you just wash, pat dry, and then throw it into a bag or a container, suck out all that air, and uh, and then just throw them in the freezer. And whenever you need some, you can break off a chunk or pull out whatever you need, and it will be just like having fresh herbs. Basil is one of those ones that does require being frozen. You can freeze it in water, but I find it does much better in oil, so I use an olive oil, or as a pesto. And you can make pestos out of any herbs. Pesto just means herbs and oil. So, sage pesto, basil, oregano, thyme, or a mix of whatever you want, it's all there. And so these are great because You can freeze them in an ice cube tray in little amounts, and then you just pop them out, put them in a bag, or keep them in there and pop them out when you need them. And there you have fresh herbs for your cooking over the winter months. So you can mix and match your own, which is a lot of fun making up your own. I like this Simon and Garfunkel, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. You can do that in oil or butter. Now, herbal butter is a lot of fun. It doesn't have a super long freezer life, usually 3 to 4 months. But you take butter, you could probably do it with margarine too. Chop up a bunch of herbs, mix it in really well. So you soften the butter or the margarine, mix it in really well, and then put it into, you can either roll it into a log or spread it out on a sheet and then cut it. And then you wrap it up tightly, put it in the fridge, and then as you need one, you just pull it out. So there's nothing beats fish or chicken or even a steak. You pull out a little square or slice of your herb butter and pop it on top and let it melt. It is delicious. And it's the only way to get fresh herbs because the stuff you buy in the grocery store over the winter months, not so great. So don't be afraid to mix and match your own things. Try a few different mediums. You can try some in oil, you can try some maybe just in water or a mix of butter, margarine. Have fun with them, and you'll improve your cooking, something fierce. All right, so vegetables. What freezes well? As I said, pretty much everything. And the same with fruit. Pretty much everything freezes really well too. Just be aware that when you thaw them, there is going to be quite a bit of textural change. So things will be softer, or like berries, for example, berries kind of collapse. So if you want to use berries in baking, a lot of times you add them frozen. You can coat them with a little bit of sugar or a little bit of flour and throw them in, and then they'll hold their shape while they're baking. Most of the time with our vegetables, peas, beans, corn, even broccoli or cauliflower, you're having that for a meal because you're good, and then you're going to cook it. So you're kind of used to those textural changes. Things like zucchini or celery, those are something you want to add to a dish. You wouldn't really want those on their own because they do get quite a bit of a textural change. And snap and snow peas can be frozen. I don't particularly care for them. I don't like the texture they get, but they can be frozen. So you can still use them in stir fries or in other dishes. And when I say sturdy greens, I'm talking about things like chard or kale, even spinach. Though there are cabbage, I find there's better ways of preserving these, but you can do that. You can also process the food and then freeze it, which I find really helps with meals. I love these little super dishes that Lee Valley sells. They come in 2 cup, 1 cup, half cup, and then you can get small ones to for things like garlic and stuff. Basically, you make what you want, portion it out into this freezer cube, put the lid on, and throw it in the freezer. And when you need something, there you go. I find this is works really well for those herbs, or sometimes you have a bunch of different vegetables that you roast or chop up, and then you just put them in a little cup, and then when you want to make something later on, you can pop them out, put it in. You can make all sorts of different fruit purees or vegetable purees even if you want, and freeze them and then pop them out when you need them. So it works really, really well, and it helps save time with your cooking because you've already got the ingredients right there. Now, dehydrating and drying. This, we don't really actually do a lot of this, and we can do a lot more. It's one of the oldest forms of preserving food. People used to just lay it out on, in the sun and let things just dry naturally. There's all sorts of different dehydrators on the market. The Kasori is the one that I have. I've had a couple, and I got this one because I like the metal versus the plastic. Not sure if it makes a difference or not, but I prefer it. So as I said, one of our oldest food preservation techniques, and it's funny because I actually did a webinar the other day where someone was talking about this. And what did they say? It was one of the oldest forms. They started drying food in 12,000 BC. So it's been around a long, long time. And the idea behind dehydrating is that removes moisture. And by removing moisture, you're actually microbes, bacteria, fungi, all the molds, they need moisture in order to break down food. So if you remove it, then the food will keep for a very, very long time. However, it doesn't mean that you don't practice very good sanitation because it inhibits microbial growth, but it doesn't completely eliminate them. They're still there. So if you were to um, not be quite so clean as you could be, you might find that you're still going to get things growing. Now, you'll see all sorts of stuff basically out of Italy and in Europe, Spain, Portugal, and they'll have these riatas of drying peppers or sun drying tomatoes. It's not safe for us to do here. We do not have the heat units in our daily temperatures in order to do this quickly and safely. So air drying really is only safe for herbs. I would not air dry anything else just because we can't do it fast enough. We just don't get hot enough. However, you can use your oven, you can use a microwave, you can use a dehydrator. We also have one of these little toaster type oven things, and there's a setting on there that says it will dehydrate things. So there are lots of alternatives there. You don't necessarily have to go out and buy a dehydrator. Though you will find that if once you get into it, it's a really good way of preserving a lot of food, extending the shelf life, and it also doesn't require a tremendous amount of space to store. So, there is something to be said for that. You won't run out of freezer space. You won't run out of pantry space because it's sucked down into its smallest possible size. So, how do you go about it? This is one of those instances where you want to get high quality. So if you've got blemishes, bruises, it's slightly overripe, this is not the food you want to dehydrate because the quality is not going to improve with the drying. So you have to make sure that you have fruit or vegetables or herbs, whatever you're going to do, that aren't too old, aren't too young, and are just they're perfect in their ripeness at this time. You want to wash and dry them very well. And then you want to lay them out on trays, and they've got lots of flat trays. Some of them, I had an Excalibur once that had round trays. Some of the Kasori I have is a multi-layer square one. Depends what you have. And you'll find the grids also vary in size. Some of them are a little bigger, some a little smaller. But basically, you lay out your food flat in a single layer. You can really cram it in, but you don't want, things overlapping. And then you plunk it in there and then you choose the temperature. Most of the machines will come with a temperature setting for the different types of fruits or vegetables, but usually between 135 and 140 is good for most fruit and vegetables. I've just finished dehydrating some celery leaves, and you do that at 115. The timing or the amount of time that is required for things to reach their perfect dryness also varies. So we did a ton of cherries this year, and because we had so much moisture, they were really plump and full of moisture. They took over 24 hours. Apricots, for example, can take up to 36 hours. So you kind of got to pick and choose. We do lots of apple slices, and we can do apples in about 6 hours. So it really depends on the produce, depends on the moisture content, and the size of the pieces. So when you're drying, be aware of how long it's going to take. Check them frequently, and you want to dry them to their optimal level. So things like cherries will feel like a grape or a raisin once they've dried down, whereas things like apples slices, they'll snap when they're dry. If you're going to dry vegetables, and pretty much all vegetables will dry fairly well, they need to be blanched first. And blanching is just dipping them in that hot water so that it preserves their color, deactivates the enzymes, but it also decreases the amount of dehydration time, which to me is kind of counterintuitive because you're thinking I'm dunking it in water, but it actually pulls it out and deactivates those enzymes. So it works like a charm. You can use a hot water or a steam blanch for the prescribed amount of time, just as if you were going to freeze. Now, there are a few things that don't need it. So things like onions, mushrooms, tomatoes, peppers, they seem to do fine just by drying on their own. I will warn you that some things, when they're drying, are quite fragrant. So, onions, for example, uh, can be almost overpowering. So, you might have to choose where you're going to dehydrate those carefully so that you don't send everyone screaming out of the house. And again, you slice them into those small, even pieces, or if it's a round fruit, you can cut them in half or into discs. Now, you can also dehydrate greens. So things like kale, chard, Napa cabbage, regular cabbage, your herbs, celery leaves. Oh, there's all sorts of different ones out there. You want fairly sturdy greens. I don't know about dehydrating lettuce or spinach because they're almost all moisture, but you dehydrate them on a lower setting. They don't require quite as much time, usually 2 or 3 hours is tops. And then you can take them and grind them into powders, or you can just keep the leaves whole and then just sort of rub them between your hands into whatever you're going to eat. This is an excellent way of getting greens throughout the winter months because, it's really hard to come by. We can't grow it here. It usually comes from somewhere else. Half a teaspoon of a greens powder is equal to one serving of whatever green. And you can mix and match them all. They don't flavor the food really well. So if you wanted to, you could, all parts of cabbage or, yeah, cabbage and broccoli, cauliflower, all those pieces are edible. So if you get them and you want to dehydrate them, grind them down, it's a very easy source of fresh greens, very nutrient rich fresh greens over the winter months. So here is just You slice them. These are sun-dried tomatoes done in a dehydrator, and then I've got beets, and these are on the Excalibur screen, so you can see that it's a fine mesh. Basically, you slice them in half, or in the case of the beets, into fairly thin discs, no more than about a 1/4 inch, and then you just dry them. So the beets, when they're done, will be crispy. The tomatoes, when they're done, will be pliable. If they're crispy, then they'll be overdone. And that's something you have to be careful is not to over dry things because if they get too crispy, they're burnt and they don't taste good. What I like to do is if you're drying fruit or even your vegetable pieces, not all of them are the same size or exactly the same thickness. So once they're finished drying, put them all in a container together, and any residual moisture will kind of even out amongst all the different pieces, and so you'll get a better quality and a better balance. So fruit. I mean, this is mostly what we dehydrate is lots and lots of fruit because I love my fruit. You can leave the skins on your apples or your nectarines or your plums. They get a little bit tough, a little bit chewier, but a lot of that nutritional value is in the skin, so you want to keep that. Cut your larger fruit into 1/8 to 1/4 inch slices. So things like peaches, plums. Plums you don't necessarily have to. If they're a small plum, you can just half them. But definitely your apples. You can dehydrate citrus quite easily, and it works great. So you can buy it when it's available and not have to try and find it or get really old stuff when it's not. Things like cherries, plums, stone fruits, they all have to be pitted to take them out. If the cherries are large or the fruit is large, a berry, cut in half. If it's a smaller one, then you can leave it whole. Just be aware that whole fruit will take, or whole berries will take a little bit longer to dehydrate. And you can see I dehydrated cherries this year, or not cherries, strawberries this year. And I took a great big tub. I got a little a harvest basket of strawberries, and that's what it came down to once they're dehydrated. So we went from probably, I bet you there were 70 or 80 big strawberries in that basket, and that's what they dehydrate down to. So, I mean, you can really keep a lot of stuff. One dehydrator, I can take almost a half to 2/3 of a ice cream bucket of cherries and dehydrate them all down, and they'll fit into a baggie. So they really are space savers. The one thing you do have to be careful of with fruit is during the winter months not to eat it by the handful because that's an awful lot of fruit. Now, some things do require a pre-treatment. So anything you have to slice, so any of the stone fruits or apples, they will oxidize when they come in contact with the air and turn brown. So you slice it up, immediately put it into a something like a fruit fresh or a lemon juice solution, which will stop the oxidation and keep the food at its right color. It also helps with some of the nutritional value too, because when things oxidize, nutrients start to break down and change. Now you can sulfur, and often the dried fruit that you find in a grocery store or health food store has been sulfured. There are some controversial um, comments about the effects of sulfuring. It's to be done well. It's a fairly complicated process and it's rather expensive. So, um, your fruit might not come all plump and juicy like something that's been sulfured, but it's still delicious, and this is just a really easy way to do it. So, if you happen to have produce that is overripe or is not perfect enough to just dry as it is, you can make leathers. And you could make sweet leathers, savory leathers, or combinations of both. And these are highly nutritious, and it's a great way of using up that extra produce that, well, I couldn't dry it. I didn't really have anything else to do for it. And they're great for a quick snack or for lunch to get all your fruit. So if you're going to do a sweet one, you can sweeten them with honey or sugar. It's not necessary. It depends on your taste. And I would sometimes adding just a little bit of lemon juice can help to preserve the color, but also add a bit of brightness to the leather. So sometimes, if it's a really sweet fruit, adding just a little bit of tartness sort of enhances the overall flavor other than it just being sweet. To do vegetables, again, you do have to blanch them first before you process them, but you can have a lot of fun making all sorts of leathers. Be creative, mix and match. So this fellow, we've gotten a whole bunch of recipes from the backpacking chef about making fruit leathers. And these are great to take, if you're going camping, on a car trip, anything like that. They're wonderful, and you can make all different kinds. So you need to puree the fruit or the vegetables first. So soften them whichever way. Fruit is usually softened enough, but sometimes you can heat it a little bit. So things like apple, peaches, nectarines, plums, they probably need a little bit of softening. So heat it up, soften it till it can be, mooshed a little bit. You might have to add a little bit of water, and then puree it all up, and then lay it out flat. Now, in a dehydrator, you actually need a very fine mesh screen in order to do it in a dehydrator. If you're going to do it in your oven, do parchment paper, lay it out flat, and then spread your fruit or your leather, whatever puree you're using, spread it out flat and thinly. You don't want it thick, leave it thin. And then you can cook it or dehydrate it until it's at the right consistency. And it should, like, you need to pull it apart. It will tear. It shouldn't just sort of moosh. It should tear apart. And then once you have them, you can freeze them, or you can just sort of wrap them up in some saran, or you can cut them into strips and wrap them up in whatever kind of wrap you like. There's beeswax wraps. You can wrap them up and throw them in bags. And then they store forever. They really last a long time. I do like to throw things in the freezer after I've dried things, just to kind of get rid of any leftover bits of microbes. And if it's something like a cherry or something that stays quite pliable, then I'll leave them in the freezer and just pull them out in a bag as needed. But things like apple chips, vegetable chips, just throw them in a jar or in a bag and keep them somewhere cool. So that is dehydrating. So let's move into cold storage. And really, cold storage is just easy. You just need space. And this is really good for storing large amounts of produce. So, for example, you had a big crop of potatoes or a big crop of carrots, parsnips, anything like that, onions. Uh, they don't really need processing. They just need somewhere they're dormant. They'll go dormant over the course of the winter. So they just need to be kept somewhere above freezing, somewhere that stays cool so that they don't come back into growth. So this could be a cold room. If you're lucky enough to have a cold room, oh, all the things you can do. It can be a frost-free garage, not one that you heat. So one that stays sort of anywhere 10 degrees and lower. You can also store in a refrigerator. If you have an extra fridge or you just use your drawers in the fridge, all works just fine to keep things cold. So if you're storing them, say in a garage or a cold room, you can put things in burlap bags. You can put them in open cardboard boxes or perforated plastic bags. There's a little difference between each. So potatoes, onions, um, they'll do very well in a burlap bag or in an open box. Potatoes you would have to cover to keep dark. I like to use perforated plastic bags for things like carrots, root crops, basically, because they do require a little more humidity than the other guys. And if you're growing things and you're choosing a vegetable because you want it to store, there's within each type of vegetable, there's varieties that store better than others. So when you're looking, look for monikers that say a good keeper or stores well. And you'll find this when you're buying apples as well. Some apples say store very well, others need to be used up quickly. So these are things to look for if this is what you want to do. Now, there are a few things that have to be done with some crops in order to prepare them to store well. So anything in the onion family, so things like onions, shallots, onions and shallots, not leeks. Um, Basically, they have layers. And so, they have those papery outer layers, and you need those to become papery. When you first pick them, they're not papery. The outer one might be, but the other inner ones are not. And you need to let those dry down. And by drying down, they're actually preserving the layers on the inside and keeping them fresh. They also need to dry, the stalk needs to dry down. So when you're picking them, so presumably in a normal year, in September, this is the top growth of an onion, and this is the neck. So this top should just kind of keel over. Whoops, go back. Sorry. It should just sort of bend and keel over. And that's a sign that the onion, it's a bulb, is preparing to go dormant. Now, sometimes you have to help them by just stepping on it to break that neck so that it bends. And then you'll find as it'll use up all the energy from the leaves back into the bulb. And when you pinch that neck, you'll find that there's no substance, like it's dry. And that is what you want. So you harvest your onions and then you spread them out. You can do it somewhere warm and dry. You can do it outside if it's sunny and dry if that's possible. And then you move them in at night so that it doesn't get humidity or chilled. And you wait until all the foliage dies back. So you can see here, these ones have all died back, whereas this still has some green. So these ones are ready. Once they're done, and that has all died back, and the skins have cured, you can snip off the long leaves and then store them whatever way you like. So you can see here, these are shallots that have fully cured, and yeah, they'll store like that all winter long. Potatoes, a little bit different with potatoes. When you first harvest potatoes, their skins are quite soft. So if you were to rub the outside, the skin would sort of rub off. What you need that to do is to toughen up and dry. So when it dries and then you rub it, it doesn't come off anymore. So in that way, it's like in a little jacket, and it will keep the tuber fresh inside. But potatoes, when exposed to light, produce something called solanin, and that's what turns the flesh green. And in large amounts, even moderate to large amounts, it's toxic. And it can actually make you ill if you're very sensitive to it. So, what you need to do is harvest your potatoes, wait till the tops die down, and then if you can leave them in the ground for a week or two, and the soil is dry, that will help toughen the skin up already. And then you carefully dig them up, carefully brush off loose soil, Put them in baskets or boxes, these perforated crates work really well. And then take them somewhere dark and dry and warm. Cover them up so they're not exposed and let them cure. And it takes a couple of weeks. And then once they're cured, you can put them into burlap sacks. You can keep them in these crates if you want. You just have to block out all the light. My husband has built me a rack on wheels, three shelves, and we just each variety goes in a crate or a box and is pushed in, and then we cover the whole thing with old sheets so that they're in the dark all the time. I label what variety is which, and we store them in the garage. Potatoes like to be below 5, and onions below 5 as well. So they'll go almost all the way to freezing and still be fine. Our garage by accident got down to -7 last year, and the potatoes were fine. So it wasn't for a long period of time. I wouldn't recommend that long term, but yeah, and they will last for a very long time until things start to warm up in the spring, and that's when you're going to start to see little sprouts. Winter squash and pumpkins also store very well. They're different than a summer squash because summer squash has a very soft skin, whereas winter squash or a pumpkin, which is a type of winter squash, they actually have a very thick rind, and that protects the flesh inside. And what you want that rind is to harden so that it will last a very long time. So wait until they've ripened up. If you're not sure when to pick, and we have time before frost, if you were to try and put your thumbnail dent into the skin. If it no longer dents, it's time to harvest. If you've got frost threatening and it only dents a little bit, you can cut them off and then continue to cure them. You do want to leave a chunk of stem, about 2 to 3 inches of stem before you when you cut them off, and that helps keep bacteria out. So pick them, keep them in a warm, sunny spot to continue hardening those skins and curing. So today I had mine out in the sun, and then when it cooled down, back inside they come. And you do this probably for about a week. That will harden them off. And then before you store them, it's a good idea to wash the skins with a very mild soap solution, as a lot of times there's mold spores on the outside and they can rot or get moldy and start to rot over the winter months. Pumpkins are particularly susceptible to that. Now, these guys don't like to store quite as cold as potatoes or onions. They kind of like it about the 10 to 12-degree mark. So I store mine. We have a pantry that's on a northwest wall, and I just kind of push them in the back, and it stays cold, but not too cold, and they do just fine. You wouldn't want to put them in the garage where it gets really cold. And root crops. Root crops are really easy to store. They're a root, so they're hanging out. They can freeze. They're just sort of hanging out. So things like radishes, carrots, beets, parsnips, celeriac. You can just wash them, put them into bags, and store them in your refrigerator, and they'll last pretty much the whole season for you. Or you can, if that you don't have enough space, you can store them in boxes or perforated plastic bags uh, in a cold space. So you want to remove the green tops, leaving a little bit on the top. You don't want to cut that whole top right off. Wash them up so that they're relatively clean, not a lot of garden soil on them because garden soil does have microbes in it, which can cause them to break down. So you wash them off, let them dry, and then if you have these bins, you can store them in sand, slightly moist sand, or I like the perforated plastic bags. These might be getting harder to find as we get rid of plastic, so anytime we have them, I keep them. I find birdseed bags actually work pretty well because they're a mesh. And then you can put them in there, poke a few holes if you're using one of these mesh bags, and then store them somewhere cold. They like to be under 5, so I store them on the floor up against the wall. And they need that little bit of humidity, so that's why the bags work really well versus, just an open box. And you can store them in sand. I find it's a bit of a pain to kind of dig around and find them in there, so I like the bag method. All right, so that's storing. Let's go on to fermenting. And people when they're always a little leery about starting fermenting. Fermenting is one of those ones that's been around for a very long time. I think it's been around, what does it say? Um, about 1400 AD is when fermenting came. And of course, fermenting started with alcohol. Uh, but you can ferment all sorts of vegetables, even fruit. It's easy and cost efficient. It does take a little bit of, there's a learning curve to it, but you don't need a tremendous amount of supplies. So you need, vegetables or fruit. You need a liquid or a brine. You need salt and you need time and patience. You need a container of some kind. You need a cover. You need sea salt and water. The container can be something as simple as a mason jar, or it can be as extravagant as one of these fancy crocks, which do cost quite a bit. But if you really get into it, they're worth the investment. Now, there are two methods to ferment. There's the submersion method, and then there's dry salting. But both of them use lactobacillus, which is a microbe that will start to break down, using salt will start to break down and start that fermentation process. So there's a little bit of difference, but not too much. The one thing across the board is you must practice extreme cleanliness because we have microbes in the air, we have yeasts and molds. The produce itself has things on it, and our containers can also have things on it. So you want to make sure that everything, like your produce, is scrubbed clean, your containers are scrubbed clean, everything, so that, and then you keep it all covered so that you're not inviting things from the air. So when you're using fermentation, you're using a fairly concentrated salt brine. And so you make up about a 3.5% brine, and then you just pour it over top of your whatever you're going to ferment, and then you cover it. And you need to keep the contents submerged, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but you cover it and wait. So this is my pickles. So I filled it with sliced cucumbers. I poured the brine over top, so the salt and the water, and then you go about half inch, and it can be tricky to keep it because the vegetables want to float. So what you can do is you can use something like a small cabbage leaf or a grape leaf, something like that. You push it down, and then it's crammed under the leaf, and it keeps everything underneath. Or you can get these really funky glass lids, and they actually fit into a mason jar. And they just as a weight, and it pushes things down, keeping everything submerged. And then you put on a cap. Now, after a couple of days, you're going to start to see little bubbles forming. And that's the sign that fermenting is starting. And when things are fermenting, it produces gas. And so you have to release the gas. Now, you can do it by just cracking the lid and releasing that extra gas, or you can get these really funky lids with it's like a little nipple. And as the gas forms, it creates pressure and then it allows it to open. So you don't have to keep opening the jars, which then prevents other things from getting in. So it works pretty well. So you open it once, maybe a couple of times a day if it's really perking along. And usually it's ready in about 4 to 6 days. The longer you leave it fermenting, the tangier it's going to taste. So it depends on what kind of flavor you like. And then once it's reached that state of fermentation that you like, if you're using this kind of lid, swap out for just a regular lid and then put it in the refrigerator, or if you've got a really cold space that doesn't freeze, you can do it in a garage as well, and or a cold room somewhere it keeps it cold, and it will last for a very, very long time. The trick is to keep it cold. But fermenting food has all sorts of excellent benefits to our digestive system. It replaces a lot of microbes that are missing and enzymes and all that stuff. So it is really good for you. Now, dry salting uses a little bit of a different technique. So it's used when we have vegetables that have a much higher moisture content. So things like cabbage and a lot of the greens that, they're mostly moisture. So you don't have to use quite as high a salt content. So about 2.5% salt to the amount of weight of the vegetable you're using. And the idea is that the vegetables are going to create their own brine. You're not adding a brine. And by adding salt, salt pulls moisture out and it creates its own brine. It can be a lot of fun because you get to massage. It can take a long time to get, by massaging your cabbage or whatever, to get it to release enough liquid because you do need enough brine to still cover the surface. And then after you've got that brine, same thing, you jar it, you add a weight to keep the vegetables submerged, and you cover it. So here you can see the process. So you slice everything up fairly finely, and then you do have to weigh it so you know what percentage of salt you require per the amount of vegetable you have. The first time I did this, I did not wear gloves. I highly, highly recommend gloves. So you add your salt, no water, and then you just squish and massage. And it can take up to 20 minutes sometimes. Just squish and massage, and eventually um, it's going to release enough salt, and then you can jar it up. I do find that the fresher the cabbage or the greens, the more moisture that's in there, and then it happens a little bit more quickly. And you can see the same thing. There's a tiny or a big cabbage leaf scrunched up at the top, which holds the vegetables under the brine, and then you put on the lid. If you're going to do this, you still have same process. You have to burp it every once in a while to release the gas. And again, 4 to 6 days, depending on the type of flavor that you like. And then you store it in the fridge. You can it using a hot water bath, but the idea of canning something that has all that microbial microbes in there is kind of counterintuitive because then you get rid of all the benefits. So pickling is a little bit different from fermenting. This is the cheater's guide. This happens much more quickly. It doesn't use a lactobacillus, it uses vinegar. So vinegar increases the acidity, which then allows the produce to pickle and um, last. So it usually the salt is just for taste. It doesn't actually preserve it all that much. It's more the vinegar, and the vinegar does this by lowering the pH. You can add spices and experiment with different herbs. There's all sorts of things you can pickle besides cucumbers. So I've got pickled peppers here. We've got sweet pickles, we've got dill pickles, we've got pickled peppers, bread and butters, we've got relish. You can do pickled watermelon peels, pickled fruit, pickled crab apples. I mean, there's so many things you can do. And it's just kind of a fast cheaters version. So these are easier to store because these do get canned after they've been pickled. So they're done in a hot water bath. So we'll cover that next. So canning is a really safe method to preserve food. It involves heating food to a temperature that will kill microbes. In the process, it deactivates enzymes so the food doesn't break down, preserving its nutritional quality. And it once the canning process is done or the heating process, a vacuum seal is created on the top of the jar, which prevents anything from entering into that jar. Once it's opened, then it does need to be put into the refrigerator and used in a relatively short period of time. Things like pickles will last for ages. Things like jams or whatever, might have a little bit of a shorter life. But again, cleanliness is important. The sterility of equipment is very important because we don't want to introduce any more microbes in there. And depending on what you're making, processing times will vary. And in the case of vegetables, a lot of times you have to add weights to increase the temperature by adding pressure. So we'll cover that in a sec. So let's talk about the water bath first. So you can see this is a hot water canner. This is a boiling water bath. This is a pressure canner. The pressure canning is needed for foods that are not acidic. So if you're going to use a boiling water bath, this is the simplest method. Really, really easy. You need a tall enough pot that when your jars are in there, you can have at least an inch of water above the lid of the jar in order to get that temperature going. A funnel works like a charm. When you put that over the lid and you can pour your stuff in, it keeps it from making a mess. This allows you to grab the jar around the lid, put them in and out without burning your fingers. A lid magnet allows you to grab the lid part of the jar and out of the water bath and pop it on your pot. You need a mat or a rack, which isn't showing here. This is a rack. I have a mat that is at the bottom, and so you need something between the bottom of the pot and where your jars are. And so, because if you have a pot that sort of heats, has hot spots in it, it can cause jar cracking and they bang around a lot. So you can get cracked jars, which is a real pain. So having a mat or a rack prevents that. You'll need a clean rag to wipe the rims, and you need, once you've filled your jar, take out the funnel and then you wipe that lid very, very carefully. Pop your top lid on, put the screw band on, and a ladle just to pour things in. So it's really not much. Um, so you need to prepare your jars and your lids first. So you can buy these lids, grocery stores, hardware stores, all sorts of them. There's small, medium, and wide mouth, and they have a seal on the inside. So you need to put them in warm water. You can bring it to a boil. Just as it boils, turn it off. And what that does is soften it. There's the mat you can see on the bottom of my pot. You put your jars in and so that they can heat up. You don't have to sterilize them. They used to say you sterilized your jars, put your stuff in, and then you didn't process them. But now that you process things in a hot water bath, which is the safest method, doesn't matter what you're making, you should always process it afterwards. Then all you need is for those jars to be hot. So you want to make sure they're super clean. Put them in there, let them heat up so they're hot. Doesn't And you want to inspect them first. Make sure there's no nicks on the rim um, and no cracks. So if it were to crack, you'd notice it. And it's not much fun if you've got stuff in it and then you put it in and it breaks or cracks. So inspect your jars because they do sometimes wear out. Then if you're, depending what you're making, you can either prepare a brine or if it's fruit, it's a syrup. So in a brine, it's vinegar and salt. In syrup, it's sugar and water. Um, the vinegar and the sugar are the things that actually preserve the food. So have those ready depending what you're going to make. So here I'm making a sweet pickle relish, and so it's made with a vinegar brine. And then it's all cooked down to the consistency I want. There's my funnel. I ladle it into there once it's done. And you only want to fill the jars to about anywhere between half to 1 inch from the top because as it cooks, there is going to be some expansion. So you want to leave some room. Air will be forced out, and that's what causes the vacuum seal. So leave about anywhere between half to 1 inch of space. Wipe off that lid, put on your lid or rim, put on the lid, then you put the screw things on, and then you pop it back into the hot water bath. And when they're all ready, you want to make sure there's about 1 inch of water above it, cover it, and then boil it. Once it reaches boiling, then you time for the amount of time. So with the pickle relish, it takes 30 minutes. So at 30 minutes, I let it boil. Now, processing time varies with altitude. So the higher up we are, the longer it takes water to boil. So we want this to reach 100 degrees. So we let it boil. It's usually another 5 minutes for, this is a pint jar, to 10 minutes for another jar. But you can find that easily online. Calgary's around 3,500 feet, and it'll tell you how long you need to boil these things for, or how much time you add. Whoops, I didn't talk about hot pack or cold pack. So hot pack this is what we would call hot pack. So it's prepared. It's usually referred to with fruit. So, instead of you have your sliced up fruit and then you throw it into a hot jar, pour a warm brine over it or a warm syrup over it, and then put it in your canner. A hot pack would be you take your fruit and you simmer it so that some of the juices come out, and then you can it up and then add a little bit of syrup if you need to bring up the liquid levels. Sources say that it provides you with a better quality product. I don't really find that. I don't find much of a difference. So I don't use hot pack for things like fruit or whatever. I just pour the hot brine in. And that would be called a cold pack, where I take my cold fruit, stuff it in, fill it, put the hot brine over top or the hot syrup, and then I put it into the hot water bath. So there you go. You stick it down into that bath, and then once it's done its prescribed amount of time, so as I said, 30 minutes, once that time, turn the timer off or turn the element off, crack the lid just a little bit, and let it sit for another 5 minutes just in that water bath. And what it does is it settles the boiling down so that when you pull the jar out, it doesn't immediately go and froth over, and it can come out the sides, which can then affect the seal. So give it 5 minutes and then just pull it out carefully without tipping, and then put it somewhere where it can sit for 24 hours. You want to leave space in between the jars so that there's good air circulation. Let it cool down, and you should hear a pop sound. And that's a good sign because it means your jar has sealed. You don't want to touch them, play with them, do anything for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, you want to test the seals. So take off the screw lid and try and pry off this lid right here. If it doesn't come off, it's sealed. If it does come off, you either need to start the process all over again or throw it in the fridge and use it up in a relatively short period of time. So, and then once they're sealed, you want to label them, put the date on them, and then store them wherever you store them. So hot water baths is good for acidic fruit, mostly fruits, pickles, things that have a pH of less than 4.6. It is not good for vegetables, fish, or meat. Now, tomatoes are considered a fruit, but the acidity of them varies. So you can can tomatoes in a hot water bath, but you have to be very careful and follow a prescribed recipe really, really well. Not just something that's kind of off the internet that someone does, because you just never know. Now, pressure canning is good for low acid foods, and what it does is it adds pressure to increase the temperature to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want this to happen because in low acid foods, in an anaerobic environment, you can have Clostridia bacteria, which is a highly, highly toxic bacteria. A lot of deaths occurred in, settlers' times. People would can their beans or whatever, and they didn't really have the ability to can this way, and Clostridia could get in there, and people died. So, from botulism. So, you have to be very, very, very careful. So, this is good for vegetables, meat, seafood, some soups. You have to be careful because not all things actually can even be pressure cans. So, you have to be a little bit careful. If you're going to pressure can, I follow recipes, like prescribed recipes from, say, Ball. Has an excellent preserving canning guide. Atco also has a really good one. There's a variety of them out there. So make sure you're going with a reliable source. So the same thing, you go through the whole process just like you did with canning when you're, heating everything up, putting it in the jars. But when you pressure can, it uses a weighted gauge or a dial. So here you go. This is a gauge or the dial, and this is a weight. So let's look at it a little more carefully. So the process is a little different. You heat your canner up. You need a couple inches of water. Instructions will come with your canner to tell you what you need. So you put that water in, excuse me, and then you put your rack in. It's very important to have that rack to raise the jars up a little bit. Now you put your filled jars in here, and then you put on the lid. And this is the one I have is uses a weight. So there's a whole process to you heat it up. Once you clamp on that lid very tightly, and you crank it up, and heat and pressure build up inside. And once it reaches that 240-degree Fahrenheit temperature, the weight starts to rock. And that's when you start timing. So all the air is gushes out, and once it's out and that seal is in there, and then it starts to rock, and that's when you start your time. So if we're doing tomatoes in a pressure canner, they need to be in there for sometimes 30 or 40 minutes. It's not a short-term thing. And then and it takes a while for the heat and the pressure to build up to reach the required temperature. And then it also takes quite a while for that to cool down completely before you can open. So it is a bit longer process, but if you want to do things like meat or seafood, um, a lot of like soups, different types of vegetable canning, then you have to use a pressure canner. It sounds daunting, but there's lots of manuals on how to do it. It's really not that difficult. You just have to kind of become comfortable with it. So if you have an overabundance of food or produce, what do you do with it all? So tomatoes. At this time of year, I have so many containers and bowls and things of ripening tomatoes. What do you do with it all? So this is where having a plan comes in place. And you're going to have an abundance of different things at different times. So with tomatoes, you can make just canned tomatoes plain. You can make pasta sauces. I just did 13 jars of salsa the other day. I've made tomato jam. I've made tomato chutney. I make um, probably 30 or 40 jars of pizza sauce. I did a lemon tomato soup yesterday. You can dehydrate them. You can roast them and then put them in a sauce or freeze them. You can make ketchup. You can freeze them whole. Sometimes, you just can't get to them. There's too many. Throw them all into a great big bag and pop them in the freezer. And when you're ready to use them, pull them out. The skins just slip right off, and then you can do whatever you need to do with them. Just being aware that the texture will be very different. You can juice them too. You can make savory jams. There's so many different things you can make with them. And it does help to have kind of a list of what you can do with them too, so that you can prepare it quickly. Cherry tomatoes, if you grow a lot of cherry tomatoes, they produce abundantly. You can't eat them all, but you can roast them, you can ferment them, you can season them and can them, you can make them into bruschetta, you can freeze them. I like to make up a roasted cherry tomato sauce. Basically, I fill a small casserole with cherry tomatoes and tuck in basil, oregano, and slivers of garlic. Drizzle it with a little bit of oil, a little bit of salt, and cover, and then roast it at 250 until everything's bubbly. I puree it, and then once it's cooled, pour it into bags and freeze it. And I'll add that to whenever I'm making a tomato sauce. And the flavor is incredible. Apples are another one that in a good year can be overwhelming. And again, this is one of those things you can have some apples that are keepers and some that are non-keepers that you have to use pretty quickly. We have an apple tree called Prairie Sensation that is delicious apples, and that's what you see here. But they don't really last very long. They're not a storer. And so when they start to ripen and it produces prodigiously every single year, you have to do something really fast. So we do all sorts of dehydrated apples. I've made fruit leather with them. I can them, so I make lots of applesauce, apple butter, pie filling, apple chutney. Apple marmalade is delicious. I make a caramelized apple jam that my husband adores. Um, you bake with them. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do with them. Sometimes there's just too many of them and you can't do it all. So if you slice them, pre-treat them, and then throw them in a bag, then they'll freeze really well. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll make up, a bag that has 8 cups, enough for a pie. Throw them in the bag and then they can be pulled out. You can sauce them or butter them and freeze it as well. You can also freeze pie filling or canned pie filling, whatever you got. So there's lots and lots of things you can do with apples. There really is. So just again, be prepared. And zucchini. Um, the old adage, don't leave your car open because someone's going to fill it with a bag of zucchini. I never have that issue. I don't grow zucchini very well. So, but they are quite versatile. You can pickle it, you can shred, and throw them into bags and freeze it so you can use them throughout the winter in whatever you're going to do. You can slice it thinly. They're great in soups and stews, for making zucchini bread or baking. You can jam them. Zucchini actually takes on the flavors of whatever it's mixed with, so you can use it to with other things to kind of plump up the reserves, so that you have enough. Zucchini relish, you can dehydrate it and make it into chips or strips. Roasting it is delicious. Um, you can roast and freeze and then again use it later on in the season. So it is very, very versatile and it freezes quite well. It does have lots of textural changes, but you're going to cook with it anyway, so you don't really notice that. And sometimes you're left over with little bits and pieces that you don't really know what to do with, or you've got ugly vegetables or things that, are overripe and starting to turn. Um, I like to actually just kind of mix and match. So I roast a bunch of different vegetables all together and then I freeze them. Sometimes I puree them, sometimes I leave them whole. And then I just freeze them and put them into soups and stews. Again, these little super things from Lee Valley are fantastic. You can puree roasted vegetables and then freeze them and then use it as a roux. So if you're starting a soup or a stew, you can add a little container of this and it really enhances the flavor and ups the nutritional value. With fruit, you can, I mean, same with vegetables too. You can mix all sorts of things together, and then bring it out to bake with, or to use in sauces, or make fruit leathers. And you can even make small batches of jam with them. So don't waste anything. Use it all up, because it's all. I mean, it's your food. You need to use it and keep it over the winter. So you can prepare for this abundance. The first year we grew sour, we got a good sour cherry harvest. We had 55 kilograms of cherries, and I had no idea what to do with them all. And so it was a lot of scrambling to find out what can I do with it. Same with apples. So what I do now is I actually research a whole lot of recipes. There's a lot of information online, and I actually have harvest books where I put all those recipes in there. I make comments or changes, and then when I have an abundance of something, I can flip through and there it is. So research recipes, know what ways to preserve each of these crops, be it freezing, pickling, fermenting, saucing, whatever you like to use. Make sure that you have all the ingredients and equipment ready, especially if you're canning, getting lids, because all of a sudden when you're in the middle of canning, all the lids are gone. Or last year there was a sugar shortage. You couldn't find sugar. So being prepared ahead of time will really help. And then when you are making all of this stuff, make sure that it's stuff that you're going to use. There's nothing worse than going through all the effort, and then you don't use it. So um, just do what you think you might use. So we don't use a lot of sauces or condiments, so I don't make a lot of those because I usually end up just having to get rid of them. So having a well-stocked pantry, a well-stocked freezer, and a cold storage is going to ensure that you have very nutritious and healthy winter eating. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was amazing. I'll tell you, I usually take away, at least 5 things. Today, I think I've taken away at least 15. So, wow, I'm still I have to prioritize my projects now. How about everybody else? We've got some questions, so thanks very much. Shall we do some questions?
Sure bet. Yeah.
All right, let's start with we have Sharon Lynn with harvesting potatoes. We
Okay.
did talk about storage, but and thank you for your storage ideas about also to prepare them ahead of time to give them a little preconditioning.
Yeah.
Now we have Sharon with putting some potatoes in hemp straw, but they didn't make it past February. Would you be able to suggest some tips there?
It depends how warm that storage space is. And it depends on the variety because not all potato varieties are good storers. So that again is when you're if you're that's what your plan is to store them, then to know which varieties are going to have a long storage life. It's the same with onions, you know, the big Walla Wallas. They don't store as long as some of the other winter keepers. So just be aware. And it also is dependent on the heat. So if you keep onions, carrots, potatoes, if you can keep them, you know, just above freezing, they'll last a really, really long time. But that's what we find because we store a lot of that stuff in our garage, and once it starts to heat up, kind of Marchish, then things start to root or spoil.
Thank you. Oh, okay. That's let's move on. I didn't even know there was a difference between storing and what do you call them, keepers and
Yeah, they'll call them, they'll say, you
non-keepers,
know, really good, they'll store well or winter keepers. Um, those are usually monikers that they add to them, and I look for them when I'm choosing varieties.
right? Start first with the type. Now we just wanted a clarification here. We have Shannon, and also I'd just love to hear it again. Did we hear this correctly? Cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli leaves dehydrate well and don't add flavor to smoothies, or
Ooh,
etc. Or maybe
smoothies, I don't know about, but you don't
things
use very
might.
much of it. So, about half a teaspoon is actually considered a full serving. So, if you're adding that to a smoothie, it doesn't really add a ton of flavor, but it adds all those nutrients. And that's when it's done in a powder. So if you were to add dehydrated leaves and stuff, you might get a little more flavor. But I find with the powders, I don't really taste much. But then I haven't done a lot of cabbage broccoli powder or dehydrating because we usually have enough to freeze. But I'm going to try it this year because we had a pitiful crop. I want to get something from it.
No, here it comes back to seed to table, right? Like leaves, they're usually like just keeping the moths busy, right? But it's like now we can think about another use of a product that honestly I might consider waste, you know?
Yeah, you do want to use the younger
Mhm,
leaves versus the old tough
mhm.
leaves,
Okay,
because they become very fibrous and dense. The small leaves are the most nutritious. So the ones kind of near the top, even if they're flowering, you know, the stalk goes up, all those leaves at the top are just fine.
nice. Well, see, another project. Now back to the pressure cookers.
Hmm.
Thank you for those great pictures of each stage and why they're important. Um, Can we use an old style pressure cooker instead of a pressure canner?
Yes, it depends on what it is. You do if the newer ones come with a dial. I have a very old one that was my parents', and it's weighted. So Um, you do have to check the seals, and before it really any new or old, you should always check your seals because having that lid blast off or leak hot fluid could be a disaster. But yes, if you can get the pressure up and you can get the temperature to it, it should work okay. I don't know if I said this, but because of our altitude, we have to I did, I guess, yes. You have to add the weight, but sometimes you have to add time as well. So with canning, you have to add another 5 or 10 minutes because of our altitude. I'm not sure if I put that in the handout, but it's available online from a variety of sources.
Okay, yeah, right. The Calgary, because I think we're at what, 3,000 feet?
It could vary.
Oh,
Like
of
we're up
course.
we're up closer to 3,800 feet where I am, but if you're down
Okay.
by the river, you're about 3,200. But anything above 3,000
Mm,
you need to adjust. And, you know, it depends where your recipe comes from. It will say 10, 20 minutes. Then you have to go and check altitude. Okay, add on.
altitude. Thank you. Yeah, good thing to clarify. Now we have a bit of a question about brining.
Uh-huh.
Now, Jacqueline made some carrots last year and tried them, and they didn't taste very good. Now, is this possibly because the brine was not strong enough?
So you fermented them or canned them?
Ooh, canned
Canned.
carrots.
Okay.
Thank you. Mhm.
Um, I don't really like canned vegetables, but it It really depends on the quality of the produce that you're canning. So, did they have good flavor to begin with? Um, they will change a little bit. Like the texture will change, the flavor will change a bit. So you can add things to your brine to enhance that flavor. So you can add dried spices. You can't add fresh, but you can add dried spices. You can add a little bit of sugar. You can play with the salt content a little bit. So you can flavor your brine so that it tastes a little bit better. But
Again,
it starts, if you don't have good tasting produce going in, it's not going to get any better.
I feel like corn too. I think my corn was overripe this year, and so now it's a little bit mushy in everything I do. And I think, oh,
You can make creamed corn
it's,
with it.
oh, see,
Yeah, and so I don't really like the texture, but creamed corn works really well in a variety of recipes. So you don't have to eat it by itself. You can mix it in with other things.
I like that idea a lot. I got 12 corn cobs that are going to thank you as well. Now, oh, I've had a couple of requests.
Okay?
If possible, could you refer recipes, if they're not too secret? Apple marmalade, when you
Yeah,
brought that up, and also lemon tomato soup,
tomato lemon soup. Yeah, that's
tomato
really good.
lemons.
Yeah. And
If
when you make those, you're making it with a variety of tomatoes, so all those different flavors. It's really good. Good in the winter too, because nothing beats a hot bowl of soup. I will put them in a handout and send them to Michelle, and hopefully she can send them out or post them.
Thank you. Oh, great. Now we're just checking here. We've got that one. Yes, we have another one. What's our, okay, we got lots of time. Storing carrots. Could you make your own perforated plastic bags with Ziplocs? Like,
Yep,
poke some holes in it?
yep,
Oh,
yep.
great.
Basically, all it doing is you need to keep them humid.
Mm,
So, and that's where, birdseed bags, those mesh birdseed bags work really well because they breathe and you can poke a few more holes in there. They keep light out, which works really well. You can use Ziplocs. Ziplocs can be a little bit expensive. Uh, but yeah, as long as you've got a few holes poked in there, if you're keeping them in the refrigerator, you just have to make sure that you don't get a lot of moisture accumulation because they'll start to send out roots.
winter sowing your vegetables in the fridge.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, now here's a question. In the same question, somebody asked, suggested, what about lemon or avocado bags? They're a little bit holier.
Yeah.
I'd love to learn how to reuse something like that. Like, though,
hmm
would you think that maybe that would be less humid than a bag with poked holes, or?
No, it's just I mean, even if they're in the garage or somewhere in cold storage, you do want to check them occasionally. If you Because sometimes you're going to have something that rots, or something that starts to get hairy. So, checking things throughout the season is not a bad thing either. And you do have to be very careful not to let things freeze. So
Uh,
if you have a garage that's not heated but does freeze, then you're going to have to do a little more insulating. But by insulating, you can also run the risk of capturing too much moisture, which can cause things to rot. So anything like our garage sits between, five-ish. We can heat it if we need to, but it's the best I can do.
Now here's the trick too. It's yeah, balancing cold and humidity, but not too much being trapped where the lid gets kind of sweaty and then you get that too much moisture. On that same note about balancing cold, uh, someone mentions here that they have an attached garage, but it's not heated per se. Would that be cold enough?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't freeze. So an unheated garage, like, when we get those real cold snaps, if the garage is unheated, our garage will go down below zero. And potato or a carrot might be okay, but other things like onions, no, they don't want to freeze. And if they do freeze, you're going to get all sorts of textural changes that aren't particularly tasty.
One of those mushy spots. You can just tell when you go to pick that pumpkin up and your finger kind of
Yeah,
at the bottom, it's got a little.
a pumpkin you do not keep in a cold garage.
Okay.
They need to be a little bit warmer. So that's why I say the pantry,
Oh,
if you've got a room like that doesn't get a lot of heat, you can unplug or close up the vent or whatever, that works too. Because I finally threw the rest of our squash onto the compost probably about towards the end of June. They weren't growing, but the flesh was deteriorating. So they because they have that really hard rind, they store really, really well.
wow, right till June.
Yeah.
You're almost harvesting again. That's pretty good.
Well,
Okay. Here's a question. Could we have, it's kind of a double question. So let's say it's a past experience one with carrots, putting them in regular Ziploc bags with damp paper towels, but they molded.
too much moisture,
Too
and they're
much moisture?
sealed. And they're sealed. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, so there's no circulation in there.
Yeah. That will work for greens to
Mm.
store them for quite a while. Things like cabbage, Napa cabbage, a lot of the Oriental kinds, you can put them in a bag in the fridge and they will carry you through the whole, like right until the spring. Some are more tolerant of that. Others, like a carrot, too much moisture. So,
Yeah. And thinking of the future, could you remind us how to freeze the zucchini again?
okay, lots of ways. Shred it. You want to take out the seeds, and then shred it, and then you just like I'll put it in containers or bags, 2 cups. I'll need 2 cups to make whatever recipe, and then I'll put them in bag and label it. That works really well. You can chop it small into cubes so that you can put it into like a soup, casserole, stew. You can roast it and then add it with other vegetables. That works really well. When you're roasting, you just have to be careful not to use too much oil, just enough to keep the produce from burning because the oil, it'll rise to the surface and be blobby. It's not appetizing.
Oh, yes. And I think uh, we have another question here. Abundance of green tomatoes. Any suggestions? There's just so many, and they might not all ripen. Maybe a
So
tip.
yeah, so to like we're getting close to freezing now. So if you're unsure, pick them before it gets super cold because once they experience those cold temperatures, it changes their flavor. So even if they ripen, they're not going to taste great. So pick them if they're starting to turn a little bit of color. It's called the blush stage. So, if there's a little bit of red or orange, or they're going kind of a limey green, yellow versus that green green, then those will probably ripen. So you can pick those. I usually just put them on a table and let them ripen, or you can wrap them in pieces of newspaper and put them somewhere dark, and they will ripen over time. If they are truly green, and there's no blush stage yet, you can make a whole variety of things with green tomatoes. There's fried green tomatoes, there's green tomato chutney, there's a variety of things. So you can go online and I mean, I have a lot of fun. Just I've got an abundance of this, and I start cruising, seeing what can I find. And there's a lot of people that are very innovative and creative when it comes to making recipes. So you'll find something there. But yeah, it's and sometimes you just have to try it. Like just don't be afraid to try something and see if it works for you, or maybe you got an idea. So. All right, what temperature do we need to pick unfinished veggies like broccoli or spaghetti squash? Um, Neither of them like to freeze. So with your spaghetti squash, in order to give them enough time for the that rind to harden, I would wrap them up. So cover the plant with some remay at night. It's not so much about getting light as temperature at this. You want to give them time to ripen. So cover them up and give them as much time as possible for that rind to harden. If it's going to, if you're, they won't tolerate frost. So if you're going to get frost, harvest them with a little bit of stem, bring them in somewhere warm, and then put them out in the sun and try and get them to cure. Uh, if they're not going to cure, but they're kind of usable, then just use them up quickly. Broccoli, broccoli will tolerate some pretty cold temperatures. It won't tolerate freezing, so you can wait right until frost and then harvest. Or, you can always cover it too. So if it's not going to be a super cold frost, you can just cover the plant to give it that few extra degrees of warmth. So,
Nice. Well, I'll tell you, we took everybody right to the end of this session, Elaine. Thank you so much for all of your tips. I'd also personally like to thank you for your harvest recipe book. I'm doing that too. That I'm starting that project. Just have it ready for your harvest for next year. Thank you, Elaine. We have learned so much tonight. Please, for everybody too, thanks for attending. And I've put an evaluation link in there because we want to hear more about what you'd like to know more about, and really hear about Elaine's session and the links in the chat box. If you enjoyed this session, we have more upcoming sessions on our What's Happening page on website calhort.org. And yeah, thank you, Elaine. This is great.
well, thanks everyone for attending and um, harvest, 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 harvest.
Good luck for your summer, your end of summer, your season, your harvest. All right,
Yeah,
you take
yeah,
care.
yeah. It's a busy time, so have fun with it. Thanks very much, everybody.